and welcome, everyone. My name's Mary Felice, and I'm one of the original founders of Enneagram Collaborative Global, or better known as ECG. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we're an all-volunteer community that has been created by us, for us. We're a group of Enneagram practitioners who come together with the shared goal of elevating our skills, collaborating with one another, and elevating our individual practices. At ECG, our guiding philosophy is simple but profound. We aim to help each other elevate our effectiveness. Today's not just a regular monthly session. There's nothing ordinary about today's event. We are making history as we bring together 5 global Enneagram communities for a groundbreaking conversation. We're honored today to have my teacher from the Mindsight Institute, Dr. Daniel Siegel, whose work has a profound impact on our understanding of the mind and the Enneagram. Together, our 5 communities have cast the net as wide as possible for this discussion because we believe that Dr. Siegel's insights will revolutionize our understanding of the Enneagram, both as practitioners doing our own inner work and as guides supporting our clients on their journey. His latest research ties in beautifully with the work we do here at ECG, and we're eager to explore these connections together. I'm also excited to hear from our 4 co-hosts today, who bring diverse perspectives from their respective Enneagram communities. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to your moderator for today's event, Jessica Dibb. Jessica is the founding director of Inspiration Consciousness School and Community and a longtime certified professional Enneagram teacher. She's the founder, curator, and host of the annual Enneagram Global Summits. Jessica has supported Dr. Siegel's work for many years, and they have worked together on projects and conferences about the Enneagram, breathwork, collaborative dialogue, and conscious political and social action. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that really wonderful introduction to Dan's work and what we're going to be exploring today, and to me. And I really would like to welcome all of you, as Mary did. I am really filled with joy and deeply honored to be able to introduce to you Dr. Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel is the founder and director of education of the Mindsight Institute. He's an award-winning educator, and he has the unique ability to make complicated scientific concepts accessible and inspiring and exciting to all of us. He is the author of 5 New York Times bestsellers and over 15 other, I think many other books, including The Whole Brain Child, Parenting from the Inside Out, Mindsight, The Developing Mind, a book called Aware, The Mindful Therapist, Intraconnected, one of my favorites, and of course, this new book, Personality and Wholeness in Therapy. Many of these books have been translated into over 40 languages. He's also the founding editor of the Norton Professional Series of Interpersonal Neurobiology, and he has overseen the publication of over 100 books in the transdisciplinary interpersonal neurobiology framework, which focuses on the mind and mental health. So that is something about his formal resume, which is prodigious, and I could go on and on. In introducing him, I'd also like to share that because all of us who have gathered here today have come through these 5 co-hosting organizations, I know that we are all very interested in being aware of how we can grow personally, how we can grow interpersonally, how we can support the world in growing. And I think that whatever may be our belief systems, our personal lenses of how we look at life, our political beliefs, it's just really easy to see that our world is in great need of each of us individually and relationally and globally learning how to be aware of ourselves and the different parts of ourselves, the differentiated parts, and to be aware of each other and the differentiations of each other and the gifts of each other. And one of the things that I would like to say about Dan is that he is a teacher who walks the talk. Everything that he's going to share with you today, including this new groundbreaking work, which so many of us are excited about because we have felt the power of the Enneagram and the 9 temperaments and 9 dimensions for so long in our work. And to know that there is a neuroscience that underlies it and a new way of framing it that Dan's going to bring to us is just a ground changing experience. But in addition to that, we're being taught by a man who walks the talk. And everything that he will share with us today, the practices, the frameworks, that is all what he lives. He does those practices, he lives that. And so we're about to have an experience of learning and integration and awareness. And I would really like to invite us to breathe deeply, to relax, to bring ourselves present, to really be receptive, to be in this community that Dan will guide us in feeling our ability to integrate the various parts of ourselves and each other, and to be aware of the wholeness that exists within each one of us. Dan, thank you for your inspiration and your lifetime of work, and it's an honor to introduce to everyone, Dr. Dan Siegel.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Mary, and thank all of you for being here. And I want to thank the Enneagram Collaborative Group for inviting me at this moment of our collective journey through human evolution, but also specifically about the Enneagram and some of the exciting ways we can think about that very powerful system of understanding, in particular personality. So I want to begin by a few acknowledgments. One is that I am speaking to you here from Southern California, and it's on the unceded lands of the original stewards of this land, which were the Tongva and the Chumash. And the teachings of those indigenous cultures were all about our connection to one another as a human family and our connection with all of nature. And so in many ways, those indigenous teachings are so important for all of us to recognize. And I want to really honor and respect the original stewards of this land. In addition, I work at an entity now known as Whole Mind Catalyst. We've transferred the MindSight Institute to an international platform. So specifically, I work for Whole Mind Catalyst as well as the MindSight Institute. And at both of those entities, we really like to recognize that as people who are in the field of education, we're in a position of privilege. And also in this body with skin this color in the United States of America, you know, I'm absolutely in a position of privilege. And as a male identified body, I'm also in a position of privilege. So there will be many blind spots that I have. And we all have biases, but especially if we're in positions of privilege, we may have a lot of blind spots. So if anything I say or do, or anything that comes up in the chat in the community makes you feel misunderstood or disrespected or discounted or dismissed in any way, please reach out to us at info@wholemindcatalyst.com and just let us know what your experience was so we can keep the channels of communication wide open. And so I want to begin there. I also want to, in this particular talk, I want to really acknowledge that what I'm going to speak about is a collaborative effort between this body called Dan and 4 other science-trained individuals. The late David Daniels, who was a beautiful human being, a wonderful teacher and an Enneagram educator, a leader in the field, who passed in 2017. And back in 2004, so 20 years ago, David and his daughter Denise, who I also want to acknowledge as part of this team that created this framework, they called me and said, you know, You wrote this book, The Developing Mind and Parenting from the Inside Out with Mary Hartzell, but you left out temperament. Do you want to learn more about temperament? And I'm always interested in learning more. So I went to the Narrative Enneagram School for a week at Vallombrosa, and I studied with them. And David was teaching with Helen Palmer. And there I met two other scientists who also became part of the team. Laura Baker, who's a USC professor of the genetics of temperament and personality, and Jack Killen, who at that time was the deputy medical director of the National Institute of Health Division of Complementary Medicine. So Jack Killen, Laura Baker, Denise Daniels, David Daniels, and myself, Dan, are part of what's called the PDP group, which is the Patterns of Developmental Pathways. And the book that we are releasing next week is basically a 20-year love project that the five of us created. And once the book was finished, we made a decision. David was no longer alive, but there's many of his unpublished writings are in the book. But the four of us made a decision that after the release of the book, we would, basically go our own ways and do our own individual projects and pursue our own interests. And the disclosure I need to make is that what I'm going to share with you is my particular perspective on this PDP framework. So I honor the collaboration that created it, but each of us now are free to present our own ways of applying it. So I'm the only clinician. David was a therapist also, but he's unfortunately no longer alive. So I'm the clinician to carry forward this. And this book in particular is a book, The Personality and Wholeness in Therapy, which is focused specifically on clinicians. I have another book that I'm writing now called Becoming Free, which is for the general public. And some of the slides you'll see will be material that will be in the new book. This is both getting a book that hasn't been released and also a book that is being written by me right now. So you're getting exciting new stuff. So let me dive in. And what I'm going to do then, and Mary pointed out that, there's this whole field, and Jessica mentioned it too, of interpersonal neurobiology. So if you're interested, you're certainly welcome to join in any of the courses we have at the Mindsight Institute. I think there's even some discount code or something for you to sign up since you've been at this event. So please check in for that. But in addition, there's 100 books that I've edited in the Norton series on interpersonal neurobiology. So if you like reading, there's a big library for mental health professionals. But let me get started so we can get a feeling for this. And I'm going to go relatively rapidly through the beginning of this and try to get to the main point. So the beginning part, and Mary, this will be a review for you since you've taken so many of our courses at the Mindsight Institute. But this is basically going to be an exploration of these three processes: temperament, attachment, and personality. And you'll get a lot of these in the book itself. So think of this as a chance to just sit back and take notes. And active learning is a good way to learn. Many of these slides will be first published in the new book, so I can't release the slides themselves because of copyright law, but I certainly can show them to you, and you can take your own notes of these images you're about to see. But the idea basically of interpersonal neurobiology is that we look for consilience, or the common ground, across independent pursuits of knowledge. And so The Developing Mind is a textbook that goes through that in great detail. And I'm going to just give you some of the take-home points to see how, when Denise and David approached me and invited me to come as a scientist 20 years ago to work with the Enneagram students, the lens through which I was kind of coming at understanding the Enneagram. So this is basically looking at individual development through this IP&B, or interpersonal neurobiology lens. And in this view, we take a stance that you can really explore the mind and say what the mind is. So beyond the top three things that are usually discussed: subjective experience, the felt texture of life, the awareness you have of that called consciousness, and the information processing that we have. Those are classically discussed in the field of psychology, for example. We propose that the mind is also an emergent aspect of energy flow, and that one of those emergent properties is called self-organization. And this is, 150 pages in one of the books to go into this. So this is just on one slide. But just to say that we see the mind as more than just brain activity. We see it as fully embodied and fully relational. And that has an important frame to offer when you look at the Enneagram. Because if you say that the Enneagram is a way that people have tried to describe 9 particular lenses through which people experience their minds, well, then you want to ask the question, what in the world is the mind? And in IPNB, we actually take a stance of defining the mind as having these 4 features. But the definition, especially for the 4th feature, is the embodied and relational, emergent, self-organizing process that regulates the flow of energy and information. And so you might say, well, how can it be both within the body and in relationships? Well, because energy flow is not impeded by skull or skin. So the lens you look at through IPNB is to look at energy flow. And when you do that, you have some very interesting things that come up. One is that the process of integration is the basis of health, and that's another 150 pages in a book. But I'm saying it in one sentence. There's a lot of evidence to show that when you differentiate and link, that's how we're defining integration, where in the linkage you don't lose the differentiated nature, you get well-being. And then we have 9 domains of integration, and I was hoping that those would each correspond to each of the 9 Enneagram groupings, but it does not. Unfortunately, I tried like mad to twist it all into that, because it would have been so cool to have 9 domains of integration that were independently, discovered alongside the Enneagram, and when you find that independence, we call it consilience, but it didn't work. So we dropped it. There were lots of things we tried and dropped. But anyway, this is one way in IPNB we integrate consciousness, one of the 9 domains. And you do it by an image of a wheel where the rim, is all the things you can be aware of. The hub represents awareness itself. And, I was able to do this with tens of thousands of people before the COVID pandemic hit, collect the data on what people experienced. And I'm going to go through very rapidly some slides here, but my apologies for how fast this is. But when people experience pure awareness in the hub itself by bending that spoke around, this is a practice I do every morning, and you're welcome to come to my website and for free at the dismay of our accountant. We give it away for free. We've had lots of people, do the wheel as a daily practice. And what happens is you can then correlate the subjective findings of doing the wheel of awareness with what physicists talk about energy. And I'm just going to not take the time to go through all this, but just to say that there's a notion that in reality, we have what's called a plane of possibility, which is a mathematical space in physics terms that's called the sea of potential, or the quantum vacuum. So it's the formless source of all form. And it looks like, when you correlate the wheel practice with this image, that what the wheel is helping us reveal is that things you experience on the rim are when probability values are above this open, spacious, infinite potential place where there's no separation and no disconnection. There's timelessness in the plane of possibility, and that seems to correspond with the hub. That's the main reason I want to show this. I could spend 4 hours with the last 3 slides I showed you, but we're not going to do that, and we're not going to do the practice just because we're trying to get to the PDP model. So this leads to a framework, and this slide basically describes an entire book called Mind, where the proposal is that since the mind is being proposed as an emergent property of energy flow, what that means is where on a probability distribution curve, this up and down axis here, where is the energy in that moment? So if you're in pure awareness, it's down here in the plane. If you're up at a peak point, it's a thought, emotion, or a memory. And the emphasis here for our discussion today will be on these things called plateaus. And a plateau is basically a filter or a funnel that selects out certain of all the possibilities that are there, certain thoughts or emotions or memories or behaviors, for example. So a way to think about the 9 personality patterns is that they are 9 different kinds of plateaus, and that some may be more developed in some people because of what we're going to talk about temperament, but that they're all possible in each of us. And that each plateau, each personality pattern has a rich possibility of incredible strengths and freedom and playfulness and engagement that each of the 9 can create. And that same plateau, when it's not integrated, can be more like a prison rather than the playground that it's able to be. And so this notion that a given plateau can be both a prison if it's not integrated or a playground if it is integrated helps us understand in many ways what in Enneagram perspectives are talked about. I think it's called the higher functioning or lower functioning of a given personality type. Now, in reviewing all the literature we could on the academic study of personality, it became clear, and I want to say this with all due respect to words, the academic study of personality, where personality is defined as a persistent pattern of emotion, thought, and behavior that exists across contexts and across time. That's the definition of personality. So when we have an Enneagram of personality, yeah, it's about emotions, thought, and behavior. What the academic study of personality has revealed in the 70 years of rigorous academic study is that there's no such thing as a type, but there's instead a pattern. And the difference between a type and a pattern is a type is like a yes or no thing. It's like digitals, all or nothing, right? You're that type, you're not that type. A pattern is a wide range of degrees of values of characteristics that, yes, can cluster in similar things. So you can see a pattern of personality is something you could describe even with the Enneagram, beautiful descriptions and the wisdom of the Enneagram. You could just reinterpret it and call it patterns and stop using the word type. And because having been working with Enneagram people for the last 20 years, David and Denise and Laura being a researcher and Jack, every time we submitted the Enneagram work that we were doing to academic papers, it was rejected because they were saying there's no such thing as a type and the Enneagram is based on type. So it seems like just a naming thing, but it's actually an important thing. Really, really important. So we're talking about patterns of developmental pathways, and that's just looking at the whole IPMB view of how this would be working from plateaus. And then you can see, broadly speaking, that any given plateau could have many other plateaus rising above it. This could be used to describe, for example, in the book Interconnected that Jessica was referring to, a view of the self that comes from what's called a master narrative of who we are as separate. And then you have all the things that come up from that belief. But when you realize that belief is false, you realize, if you just look at this diagram, that the true way we find our way to freedom is to access that plane of possibility beneath the plateau that in this case will be seen as a lie of the separate self. In Enneagram terms, you could say, if you have one particular view that you are a type and you shouldn't be accessing other types, that low-lying plateau there would restrict you from living a freer life because you're part of the Enneagram community and you believe you should just be one type, or, thinking of parts of yourself as just a noun rather than verb-like unfolding. So that's just kind of a background of where we're coming. When you look at the deep science of physics, you and this is all in the book Interconnected, you realize, in fact, there are 2 established realms that we live in. And this was very important at the end of this book on personality and wholeness to be able to say at the end of this book, this is the book we're talking about, Personality and Wholeness in Therapy, integrating 9 patterns of developmental pathways in clinical practice, that at the end of it, what I do is talk about the psycho-spiritual aspect of Enneagram discussions, and really honoring those discussions and offering an interpersonal neurobiology view of what spirituality might be considered to mean. And then realizing that in this view, you realize you have these 2 realities, just like you can swim in the water or walk on the land. And unfortunately, in modern culture, we live mostly on the land, and we don't teach people how to go swimming in the water. And so they can sometimes drown in spiritual emergencies. But instead, you can look at these 2 realms as a part of what physics has shown is real, that the classical Newtonian realm of large objects called macrostates have the appearance of noun-like entities, like this body is here, your body that you were born into is over there. There's an arrow-bound unfolding of time, which means that's a long story, but basically you have the experience of what we call time, things changing across this arrow of time. And there's an appearance of separation across space and time. So those are what we're used to living in a body. But in the microstate realm, there are only verb-like events. And there's an arrow-free unfolding of change. So change occurs, but it's not bound by what's called the second law of thermodynamics. Anyway, and you see this profoundly interconnected nature of reality. So for me, whether it's in the Enneagram world or when I work with indigenous cultures or looking at our modern cultural, isolation we feel, I think we're excessively differentiating the first realm and not tapping into the reality of the second realm here. So the quantum realm of verb-like unfoldings is often missed. And when you lock into certain ways of understanding the Enneagram that you'll see in a moment, you can understand why the term psycho-spiritual is a necessary part of understanding what we call mental health, that the spiritual is not separate from the psychological. And I try to make that argument in the last 2 chapters of the book. Okay, so let's go now and dive in. That was the shortest review you'll ever have of the lens of interpersonal neurobiology. Mary, was that okay for you? I hope that wasn't too short. And I know we're limited on time, so I know it's important to put that in, because basically what Jack and Laura and Denise and David were seeking as people who were deeply studying the Enneagram was, how to apply the lens of interpersonal neurobiology to what they, and especially David, collecting over 50, around 50,000 narratives of people over a 30-year period. So we had these narratives to, work on, and I'm a narrative scientist. I'm trained through the National Center for Mental Health to study stories. So, here's the story I'm going to tell you. And because you're all Enneagram experts, I'm just going to dive in and not make a big deal about, we were worried about this, about that, whatever. I'm just going to tell you the story. So here's our proposal. As a group, we always want to say, and we say it over and over again, probably too many times in the book, this is a hypothesis. It could be completely wrong, and it should be gotten rid of. And it should be studied and gotten rid of if it's wrong. It could be partially true, and the parts that are true should be held on to. The other stuff, throw it away. Or it could be pretty much right on and true. And so we can test that empirically, and we're going to. Laura has 600 twin pairs that we're going to try to look into this with. But, other people will study it too now that it's in this detailed form. But in clinical practice, I can tell you, having used this for over 15 years, because we first published this in 2010 in a book called The Mindful Therapist, a chapter there. And Jack Killen published a similar summary of our work at that point in 2009 in the Enneagram Journal. So, this is very practically useful, but that doesn't make it true. So let's just say that I'll stop keeping on saying that. You can imagine which Enneagram pattern is my baseline, since I'm so loyal and so skeptic about it all. Okay, so we think you begin with wholeness. And whether that's the Big Bang, where there's no separation because no matter has been created yet, or you're in the womb and you have what's called an implicit memory of the effortless being, You start with wholeness, and once you're born, the not the so much act of birthing, but the act of being out in the world is hugely different. So now if you don't breathe, you die. If you don't eat, you die. If you're not connected, you die. And our hypothesis, having tried lots of different frameworks to see what worked and what didn't work, and getting rid of the ones that didn't work, this is what we feel fits with the Enneagram of personality, beautiful teachings. Only it takes a lens of deep developmental neuroscience through the interpersonal neurobiology consilient framework. So we think what happens is beneath the cortex, you have what Jaak Panksepp talked about, which are 3 of 7 subcortical networks. These are called the aversive networks that handle core primal emotions, primal affects, Jaak would call them. Jaak is Jaak, and Panksepp is Panksepp. And we saw those subcortical networks as part of a larger network that was connected to the cortex as it was learning, that sets a directionality of where energy is going to be flowing. So this would be the plateau. And they are very distinct from each other. So they're very differentiated. And you can look at the motivation beneath the anger that Jaak described as agency, the drive for embodied empowerment, getting your needs met. The primal affect of separation distress or sadness, the deeper motivation beneath that is bonding. And then there is the fear network that is part of this larger network of a drive for certainty, so that if you can have prediction, you can have protection. So it's about safety. So we saw these 3 as actually being the deep motivations beneath what in classical Enneagram discussions are called 3 centers of intelligence. We tried for years and years and years to try to find scientific evidence for centers of intelligence. And while there are neural networks around the gut and around the heart that in the future may be revealed to be processing information and doing problem solving and what all the other things you would use the word intelligence for, we couldn't find evidence for that at this moment. So maybe in the future it'll be there. But we do see that there's an ALEF, an anatomic location of energy activation and flow that does correspond to the gut for the agency. And that's probably because of what Steve Porges, another writer in our interpersonal neurobiology field, talks about the feeling of helplessness. The opposite of agency, what gets you angry is when you're helpless. And that's through the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve. And that dorsal branch of the vagus nerve is distributed only beneath the diaphragm. So that's what we think the ALEF is all about, is the polyvagal theory's proposal that subdiaphragmatic organs are innervated by the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, which is activated with helplessness. That's why we think there's an ALEF there. There's no center of intelligence there, in our view. And I know this might feel awkward for those of you who lived your professional lives teaching the center of intelligence. And you'll see that in the map in a moment, why we've come to that conclusion. Same thing with the heart. Above the diaphragm, the ventral branch of the vagus nerve innervates the heart and lungs, and it's turned on with social engagement, which is what the bonding network is all about, the bonding vector. And then up in the head, you have the drive for pattern recognition and the trying to attain a sense of certainty through cortical processes. So that would be more of a head ALEF. So ALEF stands for anatomic location of energy activation and flow. So there is our consilience with the Enneagram speaking about the gut, the heart, and the head. We don't see them as centers of intelligence. We see them as ALEFs. That's our second pushback. The first pushback was we suggest stop using the word type so we can actually be consilient with the whole field of academic studies of personality. And it's not a big change, just use the word pattern instead of type, actually. Okay. Now, there was an amazing consilience that happened. For me, it was just 2 months ago at Oxford. I was teaching at Oxford, the system, and I took this huge textbook with me, even though there was a weight limit on a seaplane I was on, the Handbook of Personality Theory and Research. And, though we had tried to do a thorough review of all the research related to what we were doing, we actually missed a paper from 2017. And there was a chapter in this book from 2022 by Carol Dweck, who's a beautiful researcher, incredibly gifted scientist who's contributed much to our understanding of the mind, including what she's most known for is the growth mindset versus fixed mindset work you can read in her wonderful book, Mindset, Mindset. And here in her integrative theory of motivation, personality, and development, she basically proposes, through synthesizing the academic study of personality, that there are three core needs that, and I had a long discussion with Carol that match up, where our agency is what she calls competence, our bonding is what she calls acceptance, our certainty is what she calls predictability, and there's an overall universal need she calls coherence, which in my view corresponds to our drive for wholeness, that's beneath agency, bonding, and certainty. And then she goes on in a really fun way, and I really want to honor her in this next slide, where she talks about at the interface of agency and bonding, you get a need for esteem. That's not the word she uses, but it'll spell the word etc. etc. Esteem, and between bonding and certainty, you get trust, and between certainty and agency, you get control. So you see 7 fundamental needs here, each of which is challenged, especially in trauma. Our sense of agency, bonding, certainty, esteem, trust, control, and wholeness or coherence. These are all 7 fundamental needs every human has. So that was an exciting addition to looking at all this. And when you look at this from a circular point of view, you realize that actually it's not just agency, bonding, and certainty. We noticed in the narrative, some people were very inward in where their energy would go. Some people were very outward in where their energy would go. And some people were both inward and outward in this kind of dyadic, which means a kind of tension shimmering between inward and outward. And we're going to use the word D here. So agency can be divided into inward, outward, and dyadic. Bonding, inward, outward, dyadic. Certainty, inward, outward, dyadic. And looking at it this way, it's really complicated and hard to get a visual thing. So I made another diagram. These are not, as I said, in the book. So if you display it as a grid, you can actually see what we're talking about. That what we think happens is you're in the womb and have effortless being. You come out of the womb, and depending on your temperament, which includes 2 new things we're proposing. One is the sensitivity of your vector of agency, bonding, or certainty. And the other is your primary orientation of attention, which is your tendency of attention. So I made up a word, a tendency, where your tendency is inward, outward, or dyadic. And the brain studies on that, it turns out, we found out later at a birthday party I was having with a colleague, Mary Helen Imardino Yang. She 10 years ago actually had found that in the brain, that people were either inward, outward, or dyadic. So it was incredible, another example of consilience. And so when you map this out, as you see on this grid, you can see that the agency inward then has this feature, and you can try to figure out from your Enneagram knowledge which this is, that you used to be in the womb, now you're out working for a living in this do or die situation. Your energy, your attention is inward, but your vector is all about agency. And all the stuff you need to do out in the world is being driven through this initial aleph, this anatomic location of energy, activation, and flow inward. And you are getting this feeling in your gut, right? Because you're focusing inward. And so what we think happens up in the head is you start mapping the way the world should be. And you start having a huge amount of expectation. And what we call that is an adaptive strategy. So the difference between temperament, which is your vector and your tendency, is the adaptive strategy is what you do to adapt to your own temperament. And if your attachment experiences are not secure, it will push you towards the vulnerable, down, non-integrated side of this given pattern. And if your experiences were secure, you're more likely to go toward the higher or more functional strengths, the integrative functioning of that given pattern. So what we found is that you can go through each of these. If we do the agency dyadic, meaning your attention is both inward and outward in this shimmering tension, but it's about agency, you can feel inside how things ought to be, but you're noticing outside how your needs are not being met. And ultimately, your adaptive strategy, which we think correlates with Carol Dweck's proposal, which she calls BEATS, which stands for beliefs, emotions, and action tendencies, is you become filled with the adaptive strategy, which we think are correlate with her BEATS, of being a harmonizing pattern where you avoid anger. And the reason why, even though this summer I tried like mad to come up with a simple questionnaire, I found that 50% of the time the simple questionnaire worked and 50% of the time it absolutely didn't work. Even though it was a really well thought out questionnaire based on what we were putting together. And what that says, as this is an example of, even if you ask about anger, because that's the emotion that's connected when this agency is thwarted, this person is going to be shifting. These are the emotion regulation modes out of that. And they wouldn't be describing anger as their main thing, even though it is related to their agency vector. So it's possibly one reason why the simple questionnaires don't work at initial pass. And also, people need to have a deep capacity where using the wheel of awareness can be very helpful to get a sense of their motivation. So you can understand what that might correlate with in Enneagram terms. And then the agency outward is where you have all this attention outward and there's all this energy put out to get your needs met. And that's more like a directing pattern. So, we decided not to use the Enneagram names because some of them, for example, like perfectionist for the AI, have a negative connotation. So we dropped the names. We do throughout the book refer to the numbers. So you can imagine this AI would be correlating with the 1, the AD would correlate with the 9, and the AO would correlate with the 8. What we noticed that across a given vector, you have 3 research established, in general terms, emotion regulation modes that get distributed across the 3. One is to experience and express an emotion with an upregulation, and you see that in the AO pattern or the 8. In the next thing, in the AI, you would see a downregulation or contain and channel the emotion of anger, which you see in the AI or the 1. And then the third kind of emotion regulation mode is shifting out of it, which you see in the AD. And this is where the adaptive strategy, part of that BEATS that Carol Dweck was talking about, part of the BEATS here, the adaptive strategy, is to shift away from the anger, which you see as part of the growth work, of course, in people who lead with the 9 pattern. In the bonding group, it goes in a similar kind of way. We could look at the inward bonding. So you were in the womb, feeling whole, experiencing effortless being. You're now born for reasons partially due to genetics, mostly probably due to chance. Bonding is your most sensitive vector, and you happen to have a tendency that's inward. That places you in the bonding inward pattern with lots of different variations of characteristics. But here what you see is that for you to get back to wholeness, you have this interesting situation where, because your attention is inward, you're very aware of what's missing. So your emotion regulation mode is you're having an increase in the feeling of sadness or just all feelings in general, often, and you're immersed in it. But how do you establish your motivation, which is to be accepted and be connected This relational connection is what the bonding motivation is all about. So by expressing your internal world and having others recognize it, you actually achieve your motivation. So it's a motivation is what this vector is all about. And you can imagine that this correlates with what would you guess? The 4, exactly. And then if we go to the bonding dyadic, here now your attention is both inward and outward, and you are still, the main drive is for connection. So here you work on a producing pattern, right? That allows you to experience this way in which if I can do a performance or create something that then you approve of, I'm going to get my connection through what I produce, right? So I'm not as filled with the emotional experience of sadness or separation stress initially. So I'm down regulating that emotion. I'm containing it and channeling it into production. So a producing mode, if you will. And these are words I've come up with since the book was published, because in teaching this to clinicians, it's hard to remember just the BD. So thinking about this as a producing pattern has been helpful. In the bonding outward, what you see is used to be in the womb, now you're out in the world, your attention is outward, but the main drive motivation is for relational connection. So what do you do there? Well, because your attention is outward, you seek to understand and sense the needs and meet the needs of other people. And so you are meeting their needs, but you're shifting away from an awareness of your own needs for connection. But you establish that connection, because that's the motivation, by meeting the needs of others. And that's the clearly, you can imagine the 2 pattern in the Enneagram of personality view. And then when we go to the certainty, so again, these are ABC. These are the core subcortical primal affects that connect with the cortical systems that allow you to pursue this. This would be the alef. The agency is the alef of the gut. The bonding is the alef, the anatomic location of energy activation and flow that you would say in the above diaphragm area, the heart included, and certainty would be up in the head. So here, when it's inward, used to be out, you used to be whole in the womb, now you're not. How do you get back to wholeness is the whole proposal of what personality is all about. It's a lifelong journey. So here, how do you achieve certainty when your attention is inward? Well, one way you do it is you try to do whatever you can to make sure your knowledge is preparing you for any eventualities that might happen. Protect your space, protect your time. Preparing in these various ways is what the CI is all about. So it's a preparing pattern. When I was teaching this over the summer in many day workshops in Hollyhock, we played around with these names, and some of the people who led primarily from this pattern said, no, I think it really should be called a learning pattern. But many of the other people who led another pattern said, no, we're learning too, And so when we talked deeply about this, we spent a lot of time talking about these naming things with ing words, all of them. This preparing pattern was always beneath the learning, right? That there can be learning for lots of reasons. I'm going to learn so I can perform would be more the producing patterns learning there. So you can see the deeper motivation is to be preparing. And in the certainty dyadic, you're both having attention inward and attention outward, right? So it's this not a blending of the two. It's not just blending inward and outward. It's this own unique emergent aspect. And what happens here is, because the world outside is so full of uncertainty, it's a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. You're aware of that because you have partly outward attention, but inward, you're aware of your fear. So here you can see you're upregulating the experience of fear. And here, what you do is you doubt everything, you question things. It's a questioning pattern. And each of these terms that, through this process of study with all these folks, I came up with these ing words. The idea of questioning is a neutral. That is, you can see where there's a downside to each of these and an upside. And the fun analogy I give is, what would you want a person on the upside to do on a camping trip? So you'd want the questioning pattern leading person to say, I'm not so sure we should walk on that cliff after a storm. There could be rocks that'll fall down, and sure enough, rocks fall down. Or, the preparing pattern, the CI, you'd want them on the trip, because they would make sure they know all about the proper ways of hiking these kinds of terrains or something. And then the final one, of course, this is the 6, the CD, the CO, the certainty is the vector, the attendancy is outward. Here, what you see is a world full of uncertainty. So that's there. You want to get back to wholeness, but your attention is outward. So what in the world are you going to do? Well, first of all, you're going to shift out of that anxiety and fear, and you're going to get involved in all these different fun, exciting, shiny things that you do. And it's basically a seeking pattern where you're seeking involvement in all these different activities, and you're shifting away from the fear and anxiety. So if you look at this, just take a step back, you can see obviously that correlates, because you know the system, with the 7 pattern, that this is a way of taking the proposal that temperament is composed of a combination of a vector, which is a deep motivation that's beneath the primal affects when they're frustrated, of anger, separation, distress, and fear. So we're looking at the motivation beneath what Yak Panksepp talked about. So we're using that. We're then taking the inward dyadic and outward focus of attention as your primary orientation, which was just our getting that from the narratives, but it turns out there's also a brain correlate that Mary Helen Imordino Yang found about that. Then we're saying that once you have this setup, that's called your temperament. Then based on your attachment experiences, they're not going to determine, this is our hypothesis, could be wrong, but in trying to do this over 15 years in my therapy practice, but also 20 years ago at Vallombrosa doing the adult attachment interview in an informal way with people at the meeting there, my impression was that your insecurity of attachment, based on the AAI, the adult attachment interview, which is the gold standard of that, it would determine if you were in a low level of functioning, the non-integrated functioning, the vulnerable functioning of a given pattern, but would not determine which pattern you were in. So that was an important proposal to make, and it's something we can study. But then as you move towards more secure attachment and you do other work at the growth edge, which we have in detail, especially through David's wonderful wisdom over 30 years of using the Enneagram per se, you'll see growth edge work that's specific for each of the 9 patterns based on this way of thinking about it. And then it allows you to see then that I can stay within a given pattern, that's going to be what I lead with. And I might lean into other things that we call bridging patterns. And there's an 88% overlap, by the way, if you look at the bridging patterns based on this grid and the lines of connection that the Enneagram speaks about. It's kind of an amazing 88% it predicts. So in other words, I can stay in a given vector, I can stay in a given attendancy, and I can also stay in a given emotion regulation mode, like here would be down. And then you can bounce around. So even in my own life, for example, if I'm writing a book, I lead with this CD pattern, the questioning pattern. So I'm questioning things. Oh my God, why do people call the mind just brain activity? I don't know if that's true. Oh, but people are saying it who have Nobel Prizes, and they've been saying it for 2,500 years, but I question it. And I said, something, someone ought to say something about that to establish some kind of truth, because maybe the whole field of medicine and mental health are just being distorted by that erroneous narrative. So then I get in my preparing pattern. So that's my bridging vector, right? I bridge in the same vector and I go over and I'm preparing the book. I'm reading. And then I see lots of activities where I could let the idea of the mind is more than just the brain activity. And I get involved in all these activities. So I'm staying within my same vector, depending on whether my attention is going dyadically when I'm questioning things, outward or inward. and this is a way of understanding these connections that happen. Or I could say, something, it's time for me to go and really work on relational things. And so I start producing stuff like books or classes or something like that. And this is the producing pattern. Or there might be a conflict. If I'm writing a book with 4 other people and one's not even alive, I might have to go into my harmonizing pattern. So I stay with the dyadic tendency and I move up across the vectors. So what we see growth edge work then is to see where you lead with. And we have now, hundreds and hundreds of people where we've done a deep dive into this. It looks like, and this might be wrong, but it looks like about 85 to 90% of people with a deep dive, not just a questionnaire, but a deep dive, can find 1 or 2 of these patterns they lead with. That's an exciting finding. Sometimes it's 3. The 15 to 10% that don't find themselves, we need to do research on that, but it could be like the Enneagram teachings is, maybe they are in the shifting mode, right? Maybe they're in one of these 3, so they're actually not so aware, or maybe they're more in the outward grouping, where they just don't have the inward awareness of their motivation. So that's an interesting thing just to explore. What is it? Are there 10 to 15% that actually don't fit into this? Could be. Why wouldn't there be? Why would it have to be everybody? But it might be that they're actually just need a little more inner work to get there. And what this does then is helps you see here that when you understand this attachment array, that we all have the capacity for these different stances of attachment: secure, and then the 3 non-secure: ambivalent, avoidant, and disorganized. When you're doing work, whether you're a coach or a therapist or just your own personal development, really understanding these 4 stances have a quite distinct way of manifesting, and any given person can access any of these 4. Maybe not so much disorganized if that's not your history, but for those of us who've had, like I have, ambivalent attachment with one parent, avoidant attachment with another parent, disorganized with one of the other ones, and hopefully I've been working towards security. But still, if I'm in a rough spot, I can act in a very disorganized, dissociated way. I can act with avoidance. I can act with ambivalence. And so this is a dynamic verb-like unfolding. You wouldn't say, oh, I'm totally secure. We can always go to these elements. So you would imagine then, if I'm in a state of mind in one of these non-secure attachment stances, then I become the downside of my baseline here. And at that same time, it might be more difficult for me to use this as a starting place to then tap into any of the other 8 patterns. So our view of growth towards wholeness is to be able to access the higher states of the other 7 or 8, whichever is not your baseline, and then to develop the higher aspects of my own baseline. But when I'm in a non-secure place, it'll push me to being worrying and fretting and, in the lower integrative functioning of this more vulnerable place of my baseline, which is the questioning. And so that's where this model is super helpful as a clinician and as just a person on the planet. Or I've been working recently with people in businesses, and it's really helpful to understand that each of these patterns is important in organizational functioning. Each of these patterns is important if you go on a camping trip. And if you don't have the 9 different, patterns represented, you yourself may have to tap into each of these patterns so that experience on the camping trip becomes more a playground than a prison of chaos and rigidity. So ultimately, and this is the last thing I'll just say, and this comes back way, way, way back to the beginning here, is that, we start with, let me get this, excuse me for all these things bouncing around. We start with wholeness. And if we can break free of these patterns of our temperament, because we have a body and we do have a temperament, the idea is that you're going to go beneath those plateaus to realize that even the statement we've been told from modern culture that we're separate beings, is just a filtering lens of belief. that creates a lie of separation. And so for me, my deepest hope about this PDP framework that builds on the beautiful work of the wisdom of the Enneagram is that we are in a place in this moment, not just after the election in the United States, but on the whole Earth's way humanity is dealing with itself in such violent and destructive ways, and the way it's dealing with our fundamental home, which is nature, that the wisdom of the Enneagram and the PDP that is built on that, but now with Carol Dweck's work, it looks like the PDP actually stands free on its own. It's not just a translation of the Enneagram. Carol Dweck translated all of the research on personality findings and came to similar conclusions. So we can say the PDP stands on its own to say that you can work to get who you truly are is beneath these filtering patterns. And that pure awareness, in a way, that hub of the wheel practice you can do every day, gets you to see these filters that are on the rim. And whether you speak about that through the Enneagram lens or speak about it through beats, beliefs, emotions, action tendencies that Carol Dweck proposes, I hope the PDP framework provides something useful that will help people come to realize that we're not just a me, that we are also a we. And when we integrate the me and we come to this funny word, mwe, M-W-E, because mwe, I think, is the identity, the integrated identity that we can take as we face the many challenges that we have in our world today. So mwe thanks you so much for being here today, and I'm looking forward to our deep discussions going forward. Thank you so much.
Dan, thank you so much. This has literally been astounding, illuminating, and clarifying. I imagine that the over 200 people that are here right now are inspired and excited. I think that hours that we could explore things, days, weeks, and months, as you will be doing, just for instance, the whole intersection between attachment and temperament, or the patterns. Or I noticed in looking at the chart that the up down shift, if you take the 3 up patterns, the 3 down patterns, and the 3 shift patterns, it totally correlates to Russ Hudson and Don Risso's sense of what we call the harmonics, which is positive outlook, competency types, and emotional realists, or emotional intensity types. So that would be a whole thing. Or just the fact that you're opening the field by talking about patterns instead of types, because this is one of the things that turns some people off from wanting to explore the Enneagram, is that even though we know, and we often use the phrase, that the Enneagram is actually getting us out of the box, when you're labeled as a type, it feels to many people like you're being put into a box. So to talk about a pattern is really different. And even that I would like to bring to you at some point in our conversations about a group of people in the Netherlands who for probably 20 years now have been looking at people as not being a single even pattern or type, that it's like, if you're a 4, you're a 4-2 or a 4-1, and there's a difference between those. So there's so many things that you're opening up for all of us. And one of the things that this particular event celebrating your book is also about, people feeling not just about studying it and understanding, but what are the applications of it. And so the five co-hosts here have each come with a question about their field and the intersection with the PDP model. And so I'm going to be bringing each one of them on, and I'm going to kindly ask each of our co-hosts if you would now, we'll just have your conversation with Dan be about 4 minutes so that we can stay on time, but that's still plenty to ask your question. So Dan, are you ready? Shall we begin?
Yes, let's begin. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for those reflections.
You're totally welcome. It's an honor. So we begin our exploration of the applications of the PDP model with coaching. Here with us today is the CEO of Deep Coaching Institute, and that is an organization that uses the Enneagram for deep inner work. and its CEO, Ipek Sarasoy, is an executive coach and an organizational consultant who has been working to raise consciousness in the corporate world for the past 30 years. And in addition to being the CEO of the Deep Coaching Institute, she's also the founder of the Women's Leadership Circles, which also embraces the wisdom of the Enneagram to support deep inner work. Ipek, we welcome. Ask your question to Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. And Dan, thank you. That was amazing. Just all these pieces that you're bringing together, from the work in the energetic and quantum field to temperament and Enneagram and polyvagal and just like so many things that you've just brought together. It's so beautiful. Actually, it's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so my question, at the Deep Coaching Institute, we use a presence-based approach to the Enneagram to do inner work, to help our coaching students gain access to their own deeper intelligence so that they may evoke the deeper intelligence of their clients, presence-based work. And we've been using the Enneagram since the beginning, since we were founded by Roxanne Howe Murphy many years ago. And that relies also very much on the wisdom of the Enneagram, Riso Hudson oriented work. And we have a lot of people from the narrative tradition in our community as well. And we have been noticing over the past year and a half to 2 years, with the help of Suzanne Dion, who has brought a lot of your PDP orientation to the Enneagram into our community. And we're really seeing the Enneagram evolving, as you were talking about early on. And we want to really play a role to help advance this evolution of the Enneagram at a time when, especially in the corporate world, the Enneagram has become quite popular, which on one hand is exciting. On the other hand, it's being used or misused, if you will, and so condensed and simplified and labeling and all of that, that it becomes weaponized. So I am, I guess, asking for advice from you. How we at the Deep Coaching Institute can work with the Enneagram, and some of what I already picked up on. I mean, even just using patterns and pathways instead of type, dropping the names of the Enneagram types and using these ING words. I love that. Things like that. Like, what advice would you have for us in terms of how we evolve in playing a role in the unfolding of the evolution for the Enneagram?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would ask for your advice about that. I would say this in general terms. The human mind, whether it's someone running a corporation or person just living on the planet, has a tendency to want to have certainty, and so nounifies things and wants to simplify things and classify things. And you gain predictability by putting things in boxes, like Jessica was talking about. So part of it is to embrace uncertainty and also embrace the verb-like nature of the unfolding of our lives, And so that's a starting place that I think wise corporate leaders know that. And they can feel into that when they're working with people who, are in their companies, to inspire them to also reach deeply with uncertainty, but at the same time with a kind of commitment to feeling one's way into reality. So, for me, what's really helpful is the wheel of awareness. When I work with people in parliaments, let's say, and they get to the hub, they can feel, and Jessica and I did this with Elijah Cummings in Baltimore, in this beautiful meeting. And, there's a lot of tension across the racial divide. We did the wheel of awareness. People could go beneath those plateaus so they could get to this larger place. Now, that plane of possibility, which is pure awareness, is maximal uncertainty. So in a way, what we're asking for, and we don't have to have people go into caves for decades and become monks, is realizing that when you come from that plane of possibility, one of the most common words that comes from there is love.
Mm.
And
Yep.
love and connection. I mean, if you want to, I have an acronym COLD that has two ways of using it. You know, curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love is one way I initially used it in the mindful brain. But then I realized when I did all these wheel things with people that it was connection, open awareness, and love. So love is in both those things. But the idea of a COLD state is that a corporate leader who's given the wheel, not just some PDP framework or the Enneagram, whatever, but starts with the wheel, gets into the hub, can feel the love that's there, will understand that each of us have a body, that many of us, at least 85% of us, it seems, you know, have this temperament filter that has adaptive strategies of personality. What I find useful about the PDP frame that I think is useful with these initial corporate engagements I have, you know, is that people can see it's a deeper issue than just naming a person's quote type. You actually want to go for the motivation, that we all have a motivation for agency, for bonding, for certainty. When we realize the PDP is a standalone, it's independent of the Enneagram. Now that Carol Dweck has this consilient view, we can then add the etc., esteem, trust, and control. But, and the seventh one, of course, the overall drive for the coherence of wholeness. So if you just stick with those seven things, you've got a beautiful verb-like set of fundamental needs, right? Wholeness or coherence, agency, bonding, certainty, the ABC, and then just do etc. Esteem. Esteem means, am I worthy and am I seen as worthy in the eyes of others? Both those things. That's what esteem means. Trust, meaning, can I feel this? You can think about the word epistemic trust, or trust in the belief in the reality of shared reality of things. And control, which is, can I have a positive influence on stuff? So that's similar in some ways to agency. But, you know, when you look at those seven things, it's what a corporation needs to have at its roots. So I think the PDP would give those of you trained in the Enneagram a way, and I want to just then emphasize shifting away from type to pattern, having a fundamental equation of temperament plus relational security leads to, you know, the way a personality pattern in the moment or a tendency across a lifespan, which is called a pathway. So that's the difference. They're almost synonyms, pattern and pathway. Pathway just means how you're describing the pattern over time. Pattern is like what's happening right now. And it is a beat. It's the beat of Carol Dweck. It's the beliefs, the emotions, the action tendencies, which just means behaviors, you know, but that would be a weird acronym, BEB. So it's better beat. You know, you can combine all that. So the PDP gives you this fluidity of being able to work at, you know, personal levels for your inner life, interpersonal ones for your family and friends, colleagues, if you're, you know, just working with your colleagues, corporations, governments. You can do it with therapy. I mean, David and I have been practicing the PDP stuff, you know, for over, I've been doing it 15 years. David, you know, passed in 2017, but it was a good, you know, 8 years. We had this model working before he passed. So, you know, there's just wonderful opportunities to use the PDP, not as a replacement the Enneagram, but almost like a developmental neuroscience view, I think, of what the Enneagram is all about. So I don't know, how does that resonate with you?
Oh my goodness. It's incredible. It's so helpful. I love, you know, moving from the nounification to the verbification, if you will, kind of
Yeah.
world, right? And I love the underlying component of love that you were explicit about that. That's something that's really growing in me as well. So, and all this PDP stuff. So yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much.
And
Thank you. Thank you. And keep in touch. And, you know, as this all evolves, you know, this is a framework we decided to put out now, you know, so people could do research on it. Since I've been practicing this, and David was for the time he was alive, you know, and it's worked clinically and it seems to work corporately and it seems to work with families and all sorts of things. We just felt like, you know, let's put it out there And in terms of, will researchers prove it's wrong? Fine, go ahead and prove it's wrong. We want them to. Let's go forward and change it. But for right now, it is what it is. It's consilient. And when Carol Dweck's model came out with this incredible consilient resonance, it was a moment of joy in me. I can't even put words to it. I was like dancing around the room going, oh my God. And then when I did my Zoom with her to find out that she had come to it completely independently, it's a remarkable moment, of consilience.
Mm. Thank you so much, EPEC, for your question and also for the work that you and the Deep Coaching Institute are doing for our world. And Dan, just to say that coming into the hub and that love is an experience of wholeness for people. So I think it's just an incredible foundation for everybody to work with every day. And so now I'm just going to say to all of our co-hosts that we're going to bring quantum time and Newtonian time here together, and somehow the segue into business right now is great because I can use the word bottom line. If we can try to ask our questions very succinctly so that we can get everybody in the time that's allotted, that would be really beautiful. And we'll still have quantum time that we're talking from. So we are moving to the application to business, and we're having a representative from the organization Awareness to Action. Awareness to Action uses the Enneagram to specifically coach organizations and businesses to develop healthy, successful cultures. And joining us from Awareness to Action is Lee Fields. Welcome, Lee. Lee is based in Athens, Georgia. She has studied the Enneagram extensively, including certifications with Enneagram Georgia, the narrative tradition, and Awareness to Action. She's an associate with the Awareness to Action organization, and she serves as a teaching assistant for levels 1 or 2 in their certification program. Lee, welcome. Bring your question to Dr.
Hi.
Siegel.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Dan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lee.
You've presented so much today that we had a question to begin with, and I've thought of several different questions in the interim while you're talking. And I've got to keep it short. So I was going to ask a question about the response in businesses and organizations to the PDP model. But so I'll sprinkle that in as if there's time at the end, lay something on me about that. But in the middle, I was thinking more that you've presented so much new information today, some hypotheses that break some old paradigms. And I'm curious, to us as Enneagram practitioners, everyone on the call, how do you think we can better use and think about these ideas where we don't fall into the desire of certainty and predictability? Like, could you speak to that for me?
Yeah. Thank you, Lee, and thanks for that question. I think one way to think about it, and I say this as a scientist and also as a clinician and also as a partner and a father and stuff. I think when you lead from love, things really change everything. And for me as a scientist, that means leading from the plane of possibility. So if I tap in there, integration is the natural process that is released in a complex system. So that's a whole long story. And I try to say this in the end of the personality and wholeness and therapy book. So that what you can do then is say, when you present temperament as a filter that's activated in response from the journey away from wholeness that being born into the world has for all of us, whether people like the view of wholeness in the womb or just can sit with the idea that life is difficult, and it's a journey where I think we're all trying to get back to wholeness. So then everyone has a filter because you have a body, and I shouldn't say everyone because it looks like we don't know about the 10 to 15%, but the majority of us have a filter that then you can say to people in a corporation, what you want to understand is, what is this filter? It's that plateau would be the scientific view of a filter. It's what a pattern really is. It's of all the possibilities that could arise, this filter is driven by the motivation for agency, bonding, or certainty. So if you start there and then work with people to say, look, sometimes this filter is really productive and it's playful and it's creative and you can use it in a thing. And sometimes, depending on the state of mind of the person, it can get you into being stuck towards chaos or rigidity, which are signs of impaired integration. So we're going to use those blockages to integration, revealed as chaos or rigidity, as saying you may be in a particular filtering mode that we call low functioning or non-integrative, or the vulnerable side, or the weakness, whatever wording feels comfortable for the people you're working with. And what we want to do is help you do two things. We want to help you move to the higher functioning of this given filter you have. And then we want to let you also not only access the higher functioning of all the other 8 filters, but we want you to drop beneath all the filters and access the hub. Because, and the reason why in the book I use the word baseline and not home base for your primary PDP is because I think your true home base is beneath all of that. It's the plane of possibility. And it's where you realize the true intra-connected nature of all of us. And I write about this extensively in the book, Intra-Connected. So, you know, I think that's teaching from a space of, I don't know how to say this in words, but it's like a feeling and a belief and a knowing and a accessing that your body, Lee, and this body called Dan, and everyone else's body listening now are the basically differentiated bodily manifestations of the same essence. And that essence is has the quality that we use the word love for. And then when you start realizing that the filters are just pulling you away from that, and in a way, they create separation, that when you're in the higher functioning, it's useful because we have bodies, but ultimately we are more than just these bodies. So, you know I've written a lot of different books, but the Intra-Connected book had to come before this personality book for me, for this body called Dan. It had to be written before I could write the book on personality patterns, because ultimately, and the book that preceded that was Aware, that also had to precede the Interconnected book. But the idea is that when you study these things and deeply live them, like I do the Wheel of Awareness every day, then you can see where these filters, these plateaus, are shaping you. So that's kind of where you as a teacher, I think, have to take on the invitation and ask yourself, can you live into this reality? And then the teaching comes naturally, about this. It's called pervasive leadership. Pervasive leadership is an academic term, but I love it. It just means, how do we instill, starting inside the bodies we're born into, but then instilling in everyone we come in contact with, that they have the capacity to make a difference in this world. And no matter what the politics are that you may believe in, pervasive leadership is what we need on this planet right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lee. Your question elicited quite a rich answer. So thank you for your question, and thank you for your work in the world. And that brings us to our founding host of this event, Mary Fleece, who is representing the Enneagram Collaborative Global. That the mission of the Enneagram Collaborative Global is about helping each other learn how to elevate our professional journeys using the Enneagram. And so Dr. Mary Fleece is an esteemed educator, scholar, and visionary in personal transformation. And she created a method called Dr. Mary's Method of Transformation, where she combines philosophy and science to guide individuals towards authentic and fulfilled lives. And so, Mary, you have a quite innovative question for Dr. Siegel.
Thank you. And before I ask my question, I do want to thank you, Dan, because your humility is just heartwarming, and your willingness to share your brilliance. Thank you. It's just, thank you. So I know we're tight for time. So my question is a little twofold. In the Enneagram's exploration of object relations, each personality type is seen as predisposed to a specific blueprint formed by the interplay of three dominant affects: attachment, frustration, and rejection, with three primary objects: the nurturing, the protective, and the belonging figures. This theory suggests that our ego structure and relational patterns are shaped by these early affective experiences. So, given your extensive work with attachment and the development of the self, how do you view this framework of object relations in the context of the Enneagram and what you teach? How do the two go together? Or do they?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mary, and thank you for your work and kind words. When I first learned about object relations, I didn't understand what the term meant. So I asked my teacher, who was a major writer in the field of object relations, and he said, it's basically our relationships, with people that are called objects. So I objected to that in the class as a young student, leading with a questioning pattern. I said, well, why would they be so abstract as to call it object relations? And he just said that's the way it was. So for me, the term object relations is really all about relationships. And it's about how you have within yourself mental representations of these figures that are considered objects. And then how do you then have both the outward manifestation of a relationship and the inward, cultivation. So you're talking about rejection. Was it rejection you said, or projection?
Rejection.
Rejection, nurturing. What was the other one?
Well, no, it's the nurturing figure, the protective figure, and the belonging figure, but we come to it through three dominant affects: attachment, frustration, and rejection. What we believe is that it is part of our blueprint, that it is part of our wiring, temperament.
Yeah. So let me ask you about that. So, I'm trained as an attachment researcher in the school of Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main directly, but John Bowlby. And so in that developmental view of attachment, we talk about the nurturing that's fundamental to attachment experiences, the experience of rejection that's fundamental to attachment experiences, and the experience of protection that's fundamental to it. So I guess I see them all as a part of one system, the attachment system. And so for my own training, I don't separate those out. I'm kind of fascinated to hear about object relations, more specifically, separating them out into different systems. In Jaak Panksepp's 7 systems, it might correlate with let's think about it. There's a caregiving system that might be the protective system. There's I guess the bonding system would be probably correlating to the rejecting one. That's the separation distress system. So those would be 2 different ones. And then there wouldn't, the protective one might be the certainty one. Maybe that could, so you could correlate those with these distinct subcortical networks if you wanted to do that. But tell me more about the thinking about protection, nurturing, and especially how belonging is different from nurturing.
So I think it's beyond the time we have here, and maybe we can continue it in the next 30 minutes. But I would love to continue this conversation because I keep asking it to Suzanne Dion, and I actually reached out to Belinda Gore because this is something that I think could help us in our own lives for sure, but being with ECG as practitioners, I think that it can deepen our work with our clients. So as I said, it's 12:30 and I don't want to hog up any more of this time, but I think I'd love to really continue this conversation. And just to tell you, we do also look at it as a grid. So each pattern, each pathway, we see a propensity so I guess for a further discussion.
Great. Well, I'm happy to have that further discussion. I'm always excited to learn new things and look for the consilience, and I'd like to learn more. So, and I think refining the way we think about things, even in the attachment field, there are two big branches of the attachment world, and there may be more consilience in the social psychology branch of attachment that Phil Shaver and Mario Mickelenser are really leaders in. And I'm more a developmental attachment person. So it'd be fun in that discussion, if we have it, to bring in someone who's really versed in that. It would have been Sue Johnson. She sadly passed away recently, but to find someone who's clinically oriented, who knows their system well, would be great. So that would be really an interesting discussion to have.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary, for bringing this. And I had the same thought, Dan, that it might be nice even to just have a little 1 hour or 2 hour with some experts, because this has such an impact on people in the Enneagram field who have been studying it. So thank you, Mary. And another co-host of this event is the International Enneagram Association. And we have representing that today, the president of the International Enneagram Association, Dr. Deborah Egerton. So the International Enneagram Association, everybody, amongst their international educational and networking efforts, is the organization that's responsible for professionalizing the Enneagram field and the teaching of the Enneagram, and for setting rigorous training standards and rigorous ethical certification standards for Enneagram teachers. And Dr. Deborah Egerton is our current president. She's been a long-time leader in using the Enneagram for addressing anti-racism and all forms of othering. She's the author of an amazing book called No Justice, and that's KNOW, No Justice, No Peace, a transformational journey of social justice, anti-racism, and healing through the power of the Enneagram. She's a psychotherapist and a coach, and we're so happy to have you here, Deborah. So welcome.
Oh,
And there you go. Thank you, Jessica, for that. And Dan, thank you so much for your work, and even more for your heart. There's so many questions I want to ask you. However, I want to try to give you a question that I know would be helpful for the entire Enneagram community. The language that you're giving us is phenomenal, and I think that that's super helpful, moving away from type and talking about pattern. I use the word energy, so you've given me some more language to add to that. But I noticed that you said the psychospiritual is a necessary part of mental health. And in the Enneagram community, sometimes we can get into places where we use the Enneagram only in one certain way. We take it into business, and we're careful about the language that we use there. Or we will do retreats, and we use different language there, being respectful of whoever is going to be the recipient of the work that we're doing. But if you could give all of us some language about the importance of the psychospiritual to mental health, I think this is something that we could take out into the world, whether we're coaches, consultants in organizations, or doing private retreats, that would help to clarify exactly what that means and why.
yeah. Well, that's beautiful, Deborah, and I'm a couple of resonances with you. First of all, I have that exact statue, I think. And if I flip my camera around, maybe I should do it, you would see that almost exact picture of a bicycle. I got to just show you this. I'm sorry, you can probably see my dog down there in my messy room. But I have two bicycle things, just like your bicycle thing there. I had to do that. It's so, there's lots of resonance on.
Yeah, there's no coincidences.
I know, on lots of levels. And I have where's that statue? It's somewhere here. I have another version that's just like the one you have there. It's so funny. So let me just start with a couple things. One, thank you for the question and thank you for your work. There is a division in our culture that I tried to get at a little bit in that very brief, and I'm sorry about how fast it was, view of the macro state Newtonian physics view of separation in time and space, where there are noun-like entities that appear like separate things. And then there's the quantum realm. Now that's just physics, where there is no variable of time, that there's massive connectivity. There are no nouns, just verbs, just processes, massively connected processes. So we live in a body that's a macro state. So we have this vulnerability to just see the world through the lens of the macro state separation. And in many ways, if we live only in that world, we're going to just feel disconnected. At a deep level, we'll not only feel lonely and isolated, like Vivek Murthy, our current Surgeon General, speaks about, but we're going to have a feeling of disconnection that is unhealthy for us. So you could say that impaired integration, where someone is separate like that, gets them to fall into what we've evolved with as a humanity that you've powerfully written about, is this in-group, out-group distinction. And then we other people who don't have the same background as we have, or the same skin color, or religion, or nationality, or political party, or whatever. And however we other, it separates us even more. So for reasons I couldn't understand when I first published The Developing Mind, it was used as a spiritual textbook back in the late 90s. I was like, wow, because I never used the word. And then I was asked to go teach at spiritual conferences, spirituality and education, spirituality and science. I said, you got the wrong person. I don't know anything about this. They go, oh, no, you do. And so I would go to the workshops and I would say, look, this was a mistake. I'm here as your teacher, but I'm actually your student. You teach me. And so in this one place in Freiburg in Germany, it was the 550th birthday of the University of Freiburg. And, the 75 workshop participants all said the same thing. The word spiritual for them meant a life of meaning beyond just surviving, a life of connection beyond just the boundaries of your skin. And I said, you mean spiritual means meaning and connection? They go, yeah. I go, oh my God. Okay, then count me in. So from that moment forward, this is a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, I realized that while the word spiritual can be thought of as a synonym for religion, and then it was separating, my religion is better than your religion, spirituality joins us because it's about meaning and connection. And so I started teaching with a guy named John O'Donohue, who is a former Catholic priest and an Irish mystic. And he and I would teach from, his point of view as a philosopher and mine as a whatever I am, a science person. And, we got to this incredible place of realizing, as John used to say, John O'Donohue, there never should have been a divorce between science and spirituality. It never should have happened, but it happened. And it was a big mistake. And then sadly, his body died. He died back in 2008. And since that time, I said to John, after he passed inside of me, I don't know, wherever he might be, I said, I will dedicate the rest of my life to the mission that you and I were on, so that we realize this meaning and connection, the spirituality, is a fundamental part of well-being and mental health. And so the word psychospiritual is it's not even almost, it's redundant. It's what's it called? It's repeating itself, whatever that's called. And so, but we need to say it. So whether you're talking about spiritual health, or you're talking about the psychospiritual teaching of the Enneagram, and originally in this book, the Personality and Wholeness book, I put it in the beginning of the book. And some readers said, some people are just going to feel put off by that, talking about the plane of possibility and the quantum, this and that. I said, okay, I'll put it in the middle. So I put it in the middle. And they say, you're still not going to get to the other stuff for those are put up. I said, okay, I'm going to put it at the end, but it's going in this book. And then someone even said, don't include it in the book. I said, I refuse to remove it. And so it's there, and it's there at a good time. And I'll tell you, I do some work on climate change issues and for the inner development goals folks in Sweden. And, I'm always pushing for the psycho-spiritual thing. And this maybe relates to what you're asking about, Deborah. So they said, look, you can say whatever you want because it's you saying it. But when you go into a corporate situation and we're trying to get the buy-in of corporations to really try to have sustainability and regenerative ways that their factories are working, you can't be talking about the spiritual stuff. I said, why not? Because that's the core of what we need to do. They go, yes, we agree with you completely. But these executives will hear you talk like that and they will shut you out. So you have to modify how you speak in those contexts. So, I'm not usually doing that kind of work, and that's their work. And I listened to them and I said, well, for now, just don't send me out to talk to those folks because I don't know if I can contain myself. But I really listened to their wisdom, and they said, we're trying to get a positive effect, and you can't throw at them the plane of possibility and the wheel of awareness and all this stuff. I'm not sure that's true. I mean, I've been asked to teach at parliaments all over the world, and I just go right for it. And people really resonate with it. And it's almost like they've been waiting for someone. And maybe it's just the science stuff that I bring or whatever. I could say scientifically, there's a quantum realm that if we only live in the Newtonian realm, we're not integrating, and integration is health. So if you just live in separation, you're going to create federal policies that are not helpful to your nation. This is how I talk to them. So let's do the wheel of awareness. They do it and they get the experience of love, and so maybe it's time just to speak the truth. I don't know. I mean, so I can't say go for it. And I think there's a way if we start scientifically, and this is my deep hope about the PDP framework for the Enneagram world, is if we can come together, you'll see in the last couple of chapters of that book, a deep honoring of the spiritual nature of the Enneagram and saying, here's a scientific framework that lets us move forward together as a human family on a planet that is waiting for us to wake up.
Dan, I, as a person who has always gone for it, and I've never really been rejected by it, I just needed to hear your words. And I think the Enneagram community needs to hear your words because where we are in the world right now, we need to bring the entire wholeness of being able to lead with love from the plane of possibility. And if that's not psycho-spiritual, I don't know what is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. And let's do this together.
Yes.
And together we can.
We can. Absolutely, we can.
Yeah.
Deborah, thank you for that very, I think, salient question, which just delivered a whole transmission to the Enneagram field from Dan. And I'm really touched by this whole community today, everybody that's asking a question, comments that are coming in. It's very hopeful for our planet, the quality of attention and awareness and love that is here in this community. And I want to acknowledge that we are moving into the space of our next time with Dan, the 30 minutes. We have just 5 more minutes to complete, and then we'll move into that other space. So thank you for your patience, everyone. So Dan, we've come to the 5th co-host of the event, and that is Inspiration Consciousness School, of which I am the designated speaker. And here's the question I would like to pose. I think maybe it's an opening or an entry to a hopefully lifelong conversation. So our main thrust of the Inspiration Consciousness School is that I am you and you are me. I am everything, everything is me. But the differentiations, to use your term, of what each of those we's is, needs to be supported and nourished, and then all those gifts need to work together. So we very much are about, to Consciousness School, about embodied, integrated awakening in action. Now, one of our primary practice is conscious breathing. And, study after study is coming out showing that conscious breathing, just even a moment of conscious breathing, the kind of global neural, coherence that it builds, because there's respiratory circuits are throughout the whole brain, is phenomenal. State change happens immediately, attention, polyvagal relaxation, all of those things. So I give to you these words of our beautiful John O'Donohue, who said, I place on the altar of dawn the quiet loyalty of breath. And what I want to ask you is, I have been correlating the 9 dimensions or essential qualities, if we want to call it that way, or the 9 gifts of each of the patterns, the 9 patterns. I have been correlating that with different ways of breathing consciously that seem to awaken or energize the gifts of each of those 9 patterns in an embodied way in people. And I'm only at the beginning, but I've slightly begun to take observations of how the different patterns breathe in slightly different ways. Of course, it's complicated by there are many other factors to why someone would breathe, the 27 subtypes, genetics, health things, and all of that. But I am noticing some differences in the breathing patterns of the 9 patterns. And then, of course, I have developed 9 ways of breathing that awaken and embody these principles. Is there anything that you can say about the PDP model, and particularly the neuroscience of those 9 patterns, that would correlate to why I'm seeing this happening, and how breathing could play a part in wholeness?
Well, thank you, Jessica. Thank you for your work and for your wonderful new book that'll come out, I guess, next year, on breathing. Let me ask you a question, because I'm not familiar with. Can you give an example of, let's say, 2 patterns of breathing that you see correlated with the 2 patterns of the Enneagram categories? Because I'm not familiar with what you mean by 9 different patterns of breathing. So I can't really respond, because I don't know. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways I'm probably asking the deeper question of, can you think of anything in your research about the 9 patterns where you could see with the neuroscience and the subcortical patterns and all that, how a different temperament could maybe impact breathing in a different way? That might be a way of asking the question too.
The vectors involve, they aren't limited to, but they involve 3 of the aversive motivational networks. But as far as I'm just trying to review in my mind, reading Yock's review, that they're not so much related to the breathing process, but they're related to perhaps what leads to reactivity versus receptivity. There may be different triggers that lead the activation of the fight, flight, freeze, faint, or even fawn set of 5 Fs that happen when you're reactive. But in this moment, I can't, nothing comes to my mind about how, if different things lead to reactivity versus receptivity, that it would lead to a different pattern of breathing. So, for example, if you think about the in-breath being a sympathetic branch activation and the out-breath being a parasympathetic branch activation, what we're talking about is the differentiation of those 2 branches so that you lead to something called heart rate variability coherence, which would basically be where the heart rate is changing in correlation with the in-breath and the out-breath. And so that's a measure of integrative states. my understanding of measuring heart rate variability is that it's basically a measure of the integration or not of the autonomic nervous system. So that's what gets triggered with the reactivity. So the specificity of what triggers it would vary in 9 different ways. But once it's activated, I don't see why the reactivity would manifest itself differently and affect breathing differently. So nothing is jumping in my mind. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I may not be aware of the science of breathing enough to say. So I would love to see a chart
Yeah.
that says, in your observation, the agency inward breathes this way and the agency outward
Right.
breathes that way. I'd love to see that chart and then go
Okay.
see if you can find anything. But I'm not in my own non-awareness. I'm not aware of anything that pops in me. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It could absolutely exist.
Okay, well, what you just said though is also my experience that when somebody works through deep inner work, some of those patterns of reactivity, everyone's breathing starts to be more. It's almost like there's a way of breathing that everybody breathes that's more diaphragmatic, more open, all of that. So I think I'll just give you a brief example. I noticed that type 9s often have a very collapsed kind of breathing. It's very shallow in the breath, in the chest, and that when they do inner growth work, they start breathing almost deeper than anybody else. It's like these huge deep breaths in their chest. And when I get them to stretch their hands out with the inhale and bring it in with the exhale, it opens up their diaphragm. So that's like one pattern. Or with the 8, it would be surprising to know that even though it's supposedly the gut type, the 8s almost more than anybody tend to take these big, deep breaths in their chest and not breathe through the belly. And that I have to work with them to bring attention there. Whereas some of the types that you would think would only be chest type of breathers, like perhaps a type 2, are breathing through their belly, even initially, even in an unconscious way. These are just beginning things that I've noticed.
Yeah. So just some feedback on it. I would urge you to stop using the word type.
Yes.
I mean, but we're all prone to that. So I'll just say that because as a scientist, I'm just having this reaction. Yeah, there are no such things as types. And once I hear the word type, I go, well, that's not real, because 70 years of research shows there's no such thing as a type. So if we substitute pattern for what you said, the reason that becomes important is because if someone's leading, let's say with a 9 pattern, there's going to be lots of variation within the 9 pattern, right? Because it's a vector, right? In this case, it would be the agency vector that has a dyadic tendency. Now, since the ALEF is going to be in the gut, but the emotion regulation mode that has been the adaptive strategy, this beats that, we think correlates with WEX beats, beliefs, emotions, and action tendencies, then there might be a way where, for me to be in the shift emotion regulation mode and ironically be in the agency vector, it's quite a strange combination, isn't it? So it's going to be very tight breathing in that combination. Whereas the agency outward pattern, right, is putting all that energy out into the world, which is consistent there. So they're experiencing express. So their emotion regulation mode would probably impact breathing in a very different way. So what would be interesting for you to do is, and again, with all due respect, not think in terms of Enneagram type,
Yeah.
but think in terms of vector and a tendency, and the correlating adaptive strategy of the emotion regulation mode, so that mode, there's 3 of them, you might find similarities actually across the modes. So everyone who's an experience and express may be having this full-on breathing that you're describing, and maybe the transformation would be where the ALEF is, so maybe people in the, the certainty vector with the ALEF up in the head, don't have any particular pattern, but when they release, you find this full-on breathing that's in the diaphragmatic breathing. But so this is where and I hope you're okay with me giving you a little feedback on the wording. This is where I
Oh,
think we're this incredible moment of, you know, and again, if everyone in the Enneagram community says this PDP stuff is dumb, we don't like it, it's not useful, please don't think that I'm trying to sell you something. I'm just offering it from our group, this way of thinking about it. So even in the breathing question you're asking, I would look at those three variables
mhm.
and see if in fact, well, if there are nine different breathing patterns, I'd love to see them. But maybe there are really just three main ones, and maybe they do correlate with emotion regulation mode across the three vectors. And that would be super interesting to play with that. So try using those three variables in a way. The vector always correlates to the same ALEF, right? Agency is the ALEF of the gut, and the bonding is the ALEF of the heart, and certainty is the ALEF of the head. So those are basically go with each other. But the other ones are independent variables, right? Inward, outward, and dyadic tendency, and in the emotion regulation mode. So I would play with that and see how that feels for you as you go through that.
That is a wonderful direction. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you for sharing for all of us, not just me, about being aware of our language as we shift to this thing that is so exciting and liberating, like your new title of your new book is going to be about, becoming free. So, Dan, I want to personally thank you on behalf of myself and this whole event, everybody here, for the generosity of your spirit and your time, for the 20 years that you have put into being able to bring this literally groundbreaking, paradigm shifting book to the world that is going to help integrate temperament into personal growth, temperament into awakening, into therapy. Your continuing dedication to the practice of integration and finding consiliency amongst the gifts of the different practices and discipline is inspiring. And so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Ipek, and Deborah, and Rosemary, and Mary, and Lee. Thanks, everyone. And Jessica, thank you for these questions that we just went through, and everyone, the questions have been amazing. I really would love to hear, if you do get a chance to take a look at the book, how it sits with you. And our whole group is really thankful for any ways that you find positive or negative or neutral or whatever. We're very open to feedback, and we're very excited after the 20 years to get the detailed descriptions of what we described in 2009, 2010, finally out in this detailed form. And so I hope you find it useful. And the MWE notion that we talked about earlier is really a journey that we're all on. And the value of that word even is to recognize every one of us as individuals has a journey we're on. The PDP model suggests, we're on a journey toward wholeness. So then you have the me part of that word, MWE, but then the we part is that we are part of one collective whole. And it's important to remember that we don't just go me to we. And that's where the word we came from. I used to teach classes called me to we. And one of my students said, you're a hypocrite. You're giving up the me by going all the way to we. So I think it's important that we don't just say we're all just one. And that's regarding recognizing our different historical origins, recognizing our different origins as a species compared to other species, but then also once we differentiate the me, recognize we also have a self as a we. And so here's another stickler on a word we haven't talked about today, but let's not use the word self to be a synonym for the individual. So we have an inner self that's in the individual body we're born into, but we have a self that's also all the human beings on this call today. We also have a self that's all the human beings in our human family. And we also have a relational self that is all of nature. And so the MWE word in this 3-letter word tries to capture that we are both a me and a we, and we bring them together in an integrated way that allows us to hold on to individuality and the importance of that, and our relationality and the importance of that, all in the same wording. So we thanks you for all the work that you are doing, all the work that we together can collectively bring into the world. So thank you so much. And together we can go forward.
Well, we also thanks you, and we also thanks Mary Fleece, Dr. Mary Fleece, because it was her initial vision and her co-founder Jeannie Haskell about this particular event. And so I would like to bring Mary Fleece back on to close out this time together.
Thank you. Dan, we have gone way over, and you're always so very generous with your time. We were supposed to be done at 12:30 and then move into another room for a certain grouping that was coming together to ask questions. How are you on time?
I think I'm good. I think I have another event I have to do. So let me just check.
I know, at 2 o'clock, and it's a big one. So how do you feel about moving over into the other room? Because if not, we've got 30 individuals who have been waiting months.
Oh, sure. Let's go ahead and do it. Let me just make sure I'm not gonna mess something up here. Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. Let's do that, and then I'll have to hop off for a bio break. But yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, so let me close then. So as we wrap up, I thank you. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to you for sharing your groundbreaking insights with us. Your research is revolutionizing our understanding of the Enneagram and deepening our approach to human consciousness or connection and consciousness. Thank you. A special thank you also goes out to our 5 co-hosts for their invaluable collaboration, and a heartfelt acknowledgement to our moderator, Jessica Dibb, for skillfully guiding the conversation. Before we end, please stay tuned for a very, very, very brief closing video that has important links there. It's access to the Mindsight Institute, and what Dan had mentioned before, there's a 25% coupon there, information where to purchase his latest book, and links to our co-host website if you want to further the discussion with each of them. So for those interested in continuing this discussion, please check your reminder link, because there's a section there if you want to join our subject matter expert group that has been going on for 3 months. If you've signed up for the 30 minutes additional with Dr. Dan, please log out of this Zoom and head over to the link that we sent you as soon as this video is over. We've got great people coming up: Marion Gilbert, Peter O'Hanrahan, Diana Redmond, and Awareness to Actions, our own facilitator from our business, Maria Jose Menudo, coming up. Thank you all for being part of this historic moment. We look forward to seeing you at our future events. So watch the video, head over to the other room. Thank you all.
Thank you.